Hi Guy, welcome back. Why in our spoilers? Michael Baldwin had grown used to walking tightropes in his life, but this time the rope wasn't merely taut, he felt as if it were bleeding. A quiet sense of catastrophe latched onto him the moment he realized he was no longer operating on a lover's instinct, but reacting to the invisible jolts of fear. He knew far too well that Victor Newman was not the type of man satisfied with surface loyalty. Victor demanded absolute submission, wanted those around him to willingly place their futures in his hands and call it an honor. Michael had managed that once. He had once believed he could control the boundary between loyalty and survival, but now that boundary was being ripped apart by a different pressure Danny, who didn't need explicit threats to tilt Michael's mind off balance, as if a single glance, a single reminder of the past, the right silence at the right moment could be enough to make him lose his bearings. Michael felt psychologically manipulated, not in the sense of being puppeteered, but in the sense of being shoved into a state where he had to choose between options he never wanted to choose. He hated that feeling. What he hated most was that he understood it. This was how powerful people set traps, never offering him one correct path, only many wrong ones, each with a different degree of destruction. If Victor discovered his act of betrayal, Michael wouldn't simply lose a job or a place among the elite. He would lose the ability to stand upright without feeling Victor's shadow falling over him. Victor didn't need violence to make people pay. He only had to push someone outside the protection system he himself had built and let the rest of the world do the cruel work. Michael understood that the terrible things in Victor's world were never a single blow, but a sequence that made the victim collapse from the inside, credibility destroyed, isolation engineered, suspicion planted, the target forced to defend themselves again and again until exhaustion did the rest. Michael could picture Victor's coldness as he watched him struggle, and in that instant he realized the most frightening part wasn't that Victor would punish him, it was that Victor would punish him while keeping a calm, composed face, as if he were teaching a lesson about order. That was why Michael began living inside a siege of tension. Every gesture had to be calculated. Every word had to be filtered before it left his mouth. He forced himself to study Victor's reactions in every encounter like a man sweeping for mines in damp ground and wrong click, and everything would detonate. Yet Victor was even more dangerous in his stillness. He didn't reveal suspicion too early. He was like a predator allowing prey to expose its own weakness. And Michael, even as he tried to reassure himself that he still controlled the situation, felt Danny tightening the cord around his mind, stealing deep sleep from him, making him doubt his own memories, making him afraid that one day he would confess something simply because he wanted the prolonged torment to end. The storm did not stop with Michael. He could see danger spreading like ink soaking into pursulent, steady, and irreversible. Other members of the Newman family, whether they knew it or not, were being pulled into the vortex. In Victor's world, there was no such thing as one person making a mistake, and only one person paying for it. Newman was a structure bound by power, money, reputation, and pride. Weaken one link, and the entire chain shuddered. Michael understood that this was what raised the stakes. His every move was no longer a personal choice, but a spark that could ignite a larger fuse. He could already see a future in which Victor, catching the scent of betrayal, tightened his formation by pulling everyone closer, controlling them harder, turning family conversations into soft interrogations. And then the danger would no longer be Michael's private secret. It would become the shared atmosphere, making everyone breathe shallowly, keeping everyone defensive, pushing the Newman family to hurt one another while believing they were only protecting themselves. In another corner of this conflict, Nikki Newman faced a decision no less frightening. Nikki was no stranger to secrets, but this time her secret carried a different weight because it touched the last foundation she still tried to protect: trust. Nikki went to Jack not because she wanted war or a cheap alliance, but because some things, if kept inside, turned poisonous. She confided in Jack, and that alone was an act of risk. Nikki understood that Jack had principles, but he was also someone who had been wounded too many times by the power games around him. If Nikki placed a secret in Jack's hands, she was giving him not only information, but the potential to collapse a strategy, change a direction, or push someone into the crosshairs of suspicion. That secret could be tied to a conversation Nikki had overheard a moment of chance that became a turning point. She heard something she was never meant to hear, and afterwards she could no longer pretend she didn't know. She knew Michael had disclosed Jabot's safeguards to Victor. It was like a thin blade slicing into the fragile balance between the forces. Jabot was Jack's pride, the symbol of the Abbots refusing to bend to the Newmans. If Victor knew the safeguards, then Victor was standing one step ahead in a strategic game. That step was built on betrayed trust. Nikki understood what Jack would feel when he realized his system had a breach, when he realized someone had carried life force as information and handed it over like a gift. But Nikki also understood something more complicated. Jack wouldn't only hurt because his strategy had been exposed. He would hurt because of the unavoidable question, were the people closest to him choosing the wrong way to fight Victor? That information might be enough to convince Jack that Diane Jenkins Abbott was pursuing the wrong strategy. Jack had always lived between reason and emotion, between the instinct to protect his family and the need to win a business war. Once Nikki spoke, Jack might begin to re-examine Diane's moves the way a man studies a map marked incorrectly. No new evidence, no additional twists would be required. Simply realizing that Victor had obtained Jabot's precautions could be enough to make Jack doubt that Diane grown too confident. Was she trying to win through direct confrontation, while Victor won by setting traps and letting others drive the knife into themselves? Jack could find himself in a brutal dilemma because if he openly questioned Diane, he would fracture his own team. But if he stayed silent, he might be accepting Victor tearing Jabot apart from the inside. At the same time, on the Newman side, a paradox was unfolding, a paradox that made Michael's pain sharper. Jack might believe Michael had proven his loyalty to the Newman dynasty, and Victor seemed to believe it too. This was the tightest psychological squeeze of all. Michael was seen as loyal, rewarded with trust, and that trust became a clamp. Because if Victor trusted Michael, Victor would pull him closer, place him in more sensitive positions, keep him nearer to deeper secrets. Michael understood the mechanism. Victor didn't only test a traitor, Victor raised a traitor by granting power, and then watching what that power exposed. And Michael, caught between his need to escape Danny's influence and his need to stay invisible under Victor's gaze, felt as if he were acting a role in which the better he performed, the more doomed he became. That was why Michael began planning in the dark. He would secretly seize the artificial intelligence program and destroy it. The thought felt like an act of salvation and an act of desperation at once. Michael wasn't doing it out of hunger for power. He was doing it because he recognized that the Aethys program was Victor's new spearpoint, a tool capable of turning a family rivalry into a massacre of data. If the AI remained in Victor's hands, Victor wouldn't merely anticipate opponents' moves, could predict their psychological weak points, choose the perfect moment to strike. Dismantle people one by one in a way that made them never realize they had been led. Michael could see that future so clearly it chilled him, and he understood it. If no one stopped it, everything would go too far, not only for Jabot, but for people he had once called friends. But the plan to destroy the AI forced Michael into his most painful problem. How could he do it without Victor discovering his involvement? Every step he calculated carried a shadow of exposure. He imagined security systems, technical traces, the stretches of time he would vanish from view, the excuses he would have to invent. He understood Victor didn't need to catch him in the act. Victor only needed a sense of irregularity. One moment when Michael reacted more slowly than usual. One moment when he cared too much about a detail he shouldn't know. One moment when he avoided Victor's gaze precisely when Victor was testing him. And then, with a single small link, Victor would assemble the chain into a verdict that required no courtroom. Michael tried to persuade himself he was doing the right thing, that he could destroy the AI and still remain within the Newman ranks without suspicion. But the harder he tried, the more he understood it was a gamble he could not afford to lose. Because when you play against Victor, losing doesn't simply mean losing everything, it means being crushed in a way that leaves no chance to rise again. Michael began to feel another paradox. He wanted to save others from a future manipulated by AI, yet to save them he would be forced to become a manipulator in the shadows. He would have to lie, to perform, to sacrifice the last clean part of himself. And that was what split him open. He no longer knew whether he was saving anyone or destroying himself. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in Genoa City thickened. The tension was no longer in public debates or contract battles. It lived in pauses, in looks, in questions that were never spoken. Nikki had spoken to Jack, and even if Jack had done nothing yet, the truth had begun spreading through his mind like a slow-burning fire. Victor remained confident in Michael's loyalty, and that confidence could make Victor bolder, more aggressive. And Michael stood in the middle, feeling as if both shores were collapsing, and he was the only bridge. Each day the pressure increased, not because new events were happening, but because the existing events began colliding, producing friction and the sound of something cracking. And Michael knew something he could not deny. Sooner or later, this plan would backfire on him. Not because he lacked intelligence, but because Victor always had a way of turning fear into evidence. The more Michael tried to hide, the more reason Victor had to watch. The more Michael tried to act quietly, the easier it became for Victor to ask why he needed to be quiet at all. This was the trap of living inside a world of power. You cannot do something major without making waves, and every wave can reflect back toward the person who created it. In the end, Michael arrived at a moment so quiet it carried the weight of a locking door. He understood that one small deviation in the plan to seize and destroy the AI could bring everything crashing down, not only on him, but on the Newman family as well. Those who had been pulled into danger, whether they wanted it or not. He thought of Nikki, who had just placed a secret into Jack's hands. He thought of Jack, who might be preparing to see Diane differently. He thought of Victor, satisfied with Michael's loyalty, as if holding a powerful card. And in that moment, Michael recognized the most ruthless truth of all. When you try to destroy a weapon of power, you often have to touch the very machinery of power itself, and it will not spare you. That night, Michael prepared to take his next step with a forced calm, like a man pulling armor over a wound that was still bleeding. He reminded himself not to waver, not to let emotion leak through, not to let Victor see any sign of something abnormal. But just as he believed he had everything under control, one small detail surfaced a sign that someone else was watching the AI too, that someone else understood its importance, and that someone else was waiting for the right moment to move. Michael realized the game was no longer only between him and Victor, and if he stepped wrong, he wouldn't merely be exposed, would be made into the one blamed for a catastrophe he was trying to prevent as the trap began to close. The question was no longer whether Michael could destroy the AI, but who would be the one to shut the final door on his future. Michael Baldwin can no longer tell where loyalty ends and where survival begins, because for years those two things have overlapped in the shadow of Victor Newman. On certain days, he still tries to convince himself that nothing has changed, that he is simply doing what he has always done as the Newman's legal weapon, calculating risk, containing fallout, and keeping a powerful machine running. Yet the deeper he remains inside Victor's orbit, the more he senses the shift. Victor doesn't merely want Michael to work for him. Victor wants Michael to belong to him, to function like a living extension of his will. And that is precisely how Michael becomes trapped caught between the loyalty Victor demands and the danger that grows sharper with every move. The kind of danger where one wrong step doesn't just cost a job or a reputation, but ignites everything, a career, a home, and the fragile safety of the people he loves most. Michael understands the cruel structure of this situation. In ordinary conflicts, mistakes can be repaired, apologies can soften consequences, and compromises can create exits. In Victor's world, compromise is often just a polite word for surrender. Michael has watched Victor transform minor miscalculations into long, slow punishments that hang over someone's head like a sentence that never fully drops, forcing them to live in fear until they collapse on their own. The most terrifying part is that Victor rarely needs to threaten openly. A single carefully placed comment, a silence held for half a second too long, a sudden show of favor towards someone else at these are enough to destabilize the strongest person in the room. Michael is skilled at reading people, skilled at keeping his face calm while his mind races, skilled at making decisions under pressure. But because he knows Victor so well, he is more afraid, not less. He can predict the next move, and that knowledge doesn't save him. It simply makes him feel the trap closing sooner, and the fear is no longer Michael's alone. It spills into Lauren like cold water, seeping through the walls of their home. Lauren watches him with an anxiety she cannot always name, because she has seen him survive storms before, serve blackmail, corporate war, moral compromise, and the kind of threats that can erase a person's life with a single phone call. But this time feels different. Lauren isn't afraid of a normal enemy. She is afraid of Victor. Not because Victor is merely powerful, but because Victor's power includes a particular kind of emotional cruelty and ability to treat another person's suffering as a management tool. With someone that cold, mercy isn't a weakness he accidentally shows. It is a concept that barely exists. Lauren believes, with a certainty that makes her stomach turn, that if Victor feels challenged, he will not forgive the challenger no matter how loyal that person once was. And when Lauren allows herself to imagine the worst that Michael's life could be taken at any moment, she isn't dramatizing. She is recognizing the kind of man Victor can be when he decides someone has stepped out of line. That terror grows heavier when Lauren thinks about the way Victor plays his games. Victor doesn't attack only his opponent's logic. He attacks what the opponent loves. And Lauren knows she is Michael's rare safe place, the one corner of his life that still feels human, not transactional. If Victor wants to bind Michael more tightly, Victor doesn't even need to crush Michael directly. He can simply make Michael believe that any hesitation, any deviation, any private act of resistance will be paid for with Lauren's pain. Lauren doesn't want to believe Victor would go there, but she cannot lie to herself. Victor could use her as leverage. He could turn her into the pressure point that leaves Michael with no real choice at all. It is the simplest strategy and also the most brutal because it forces Michael to sacrifice his own freedom in order to protect the person he cannot bear to lose. This is where Michael's internal conflict becomes unbearable. He is no longer weighing professional risks. He is weighing life and death, peace and terror, the stability of their family against the appetite of a man who demands control. Michael begins to see every decision through one haunting question. What happens to Lauren if I do this? That question doesn't make him weak in the usual sense, it locks him in place. Because when someone has something precious to lose, they are easily pushed into choosing what hurts less in the short term rather than what is truly right. Michael can endure humiliation. He can endure setbacks. He can even endure losing status. But he cannot endure the thought of Lauren paying the price for him. And Victor would know that. The more Michael understands Victor, the more he realizes that Victor's greatest weapon is not force, it is the ability to make fear feel like responsibility. Michael tries to hide the full storm from Lauren. He tries to keep the days normal, to keep routines intact, to speak in the language of logic instead of the language of panic. But Lauren doesn't need explanations to sense the change. She feels it in the way Michael pauses before answering certain calls, in the way his silences stretch longer than they used to. In the way his eyes darken as if he is running calculations too heavy to speak aloud. Lauren understands that Michael is being forced into choices he never wanted. Either remain entangled in Victor's plans to preserve immediate safety, or attempt to step away and risk that Victor will interpret even withdrawal as betrayal. There is no clean option. There is no path that doesn't win someone. The tension thickens because Michael's struggle is not merely strategist, it is personal, almost existential. He once told himself he could stand beside Victor and still keep his own moral boundary intact. He believed he could bend without breaking, negotiate without losing his soul. But the moment danger begins to reach toward Lauren, the boundary stops being theoretical. It becomes urgent and physical. Who is Michael if the person he loves becomes a hostage to his decisions? He feels himself being pulled away from the man he used to be. He is no longer only a lawyer, no longer only a fixer. He is becoming a guardian of his family's safety who must remain in the orbit of the man most capable of destroying that safety. The irony is poisonous. It makes Michael angry at Victor, but also angry at himself because he entered this world willingly, believing he could control it, believing it would never consume the people he loves. Lauren, terrified, wants to drive Michael back toward the light. She wants him away from the Newman's War, away from Victor's machinery, away from the constant calculation. But she also understands the most vicious part of Victor's power. He turns people into silent prisoners in the name of protecting each other. If Lauren pushes Michael too hard, she might force him into a rushed decision, a reckless move, exactly the kind of move Victor would punish. So Lauren becomes trapped in her own way, living between love and fear, watching and waiting, feeling as if their home sits on a crack in the earth that widens with every breath. As the days pass, Michael's world shrinks into choices that feel cruel. He cannot openly oppose Victor. He cannot fully leave without consequences that could ripple straight into Lauren's life. He stands between loyalty and peril like a man facing two doors that both lead into darkness, different only in how fast they swallow him. And the most brutal truth is that Victor doesn't have to strike now. Victor only has to let Michael believe he could strike at any moment. That belief is control. It is not a chain made of metal. It is a chain made of dread, tightened with precision. Then Michael recognizes a possibility he has tried to deny. Victor might not use Lauren only as a threat. Victor might use Lauren as a signal proof that no part of Michael's private life is truly off limits. It would take so little. A strange coincidence. A message delivered indirectly. A moment that leaves Lauren feeling watched. That would be enough for Michael to understand that the game has escalated. And the moment Michael imagines the escalation, he realizes something even worse. If Victor has begun to see Lauren as leverage, it means Victor has begun to suspect Michael at the very least. Victor has decided to test him, not with questions, not with direct confrontation, but by touching what Michael values most and measuring the reaction. Michael knows that kind of test. He also knows the trap inside it. If he reacts too strongly to protective, to a fright, he confirms Lauren is the exposed nerve, the exact point Victor can press. And once Victor identifies the nerve, Victor will press harder. So Michael faces a silent, brutal choice. He must protect Lauren, but he must do it without letting Victor see that he is protecting her. He must love without revealing love, fear without revealing fear, remain calm while his mind is stretched to the breaking point. This is the most private kind of hell, where a person is not destroyed by a single blow, but by constant self-censorship, constant vigilance, constant dread. When night falls, Genoa City still glows as it always does, but for Michael the city's lights only make the darkness inside him clearer. He knows one mistake could burn down his entire life. Yet he also knows something more frightening. In Victor Newman's world, you don't have to make a mistake to be punished. Sometimes it is enough to make the right move for yourself instead of the right move for Victor. And as Michael senses the moment of choice approaching, he looks at Lauren like she is the last vow he has left and feels his blood turn cold because the calm is ending. A small sign appears, subtle, unmistakable, that Victor has begun to reach toward Lauren. And in that instant, Michael understands that every minute of peace from now on is only a prologue to a tighter grip, a sharper test, and a trap he may not see until it closed, because the question is no longer whether Victor can threaten his life. The question is whether Victor is about to prove, without ever saying a word, that Lauren has already entered the battlefield. This channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the series The Young and the Restless from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and interesting perspectives. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about The Young and the Restless series.